we would like to introduce the next speaker who will come to the stage. And I would love to say that work-wise, we are actually kind of related, because I am a trainer and he is a teacher as well. But of course, he does it in a little bit bigger scale. He actually received his PhD from Princeton University, and the course he is teaching, the design of coffee and introduction to chemical engineering, is taught to almost 2,000 students per year.
Ladies and gentlemen, please a warm welcome to Bill Ristenpart.
All right, good morning. So thank you so much. Thank you so much for the invitation to share a little bit about my topic today, which has this kind of grandiose title, Coffee Research and the 22nd Century. And so one of the themes today is sustainability. And so if we really think about the ultimate sustainability, where is coffee going to be in the next century, in the next several centuries? And so what I'd like to share with you today is a little bit about what this image right here represents. And so what are we looking at? This is a picture of Mars. And why do I have a picture of Mars up on the screen? Well, if you really think about the long-term sustainability of coffee, there are only two planetary surfaces in the solar system where it's even possible, physically possible, to brew coffee, Earth and Mars, the fourth planet. And so it actually is possible right now. In theory, we could all go to Mars right now in the Martian summer, and in a very deep crater, very briefly, during the daytime, you can get temperatures and pressures such that liquid water exists. So you would have to drink the coffee inside back in your spaceship right now because there's no oxygen, but it's possible, at least in theory, to brew coffee there. More exciting is what's kind of shown here. This is an artistic rendition of what might be happening in the future when we terraform Mars. Okay, so we actually convert the atmosphere and convert it from a red, dusty planet into a place that has oceans and breathable air and green plants. And so the question I'd like to ask is well, are we going to be able to have plants that grow coffee there? Are we going to have Café Arabica? Are we going to have Robusta? Okay, are our descendants going to be drinking coffee on Mars? All right, or in the future, all right, will coffee be extinct? Will there be no coffee? Or will coffee just be forgotten? Okay. And so what I'd really like to share a bit is a powerful tool to answer these questions, which we can't really answer definitively right now, but what we can do is develop some of the tools to really think about them. And that's the second word of my title here, which is research. And what I'd like to do is share a bit with three different infographics, kind of about the current state of research focused on coffee. And so let's get into it. And so here's the first infographic. And what I'm comparing here are four of humanity's favorite beverages. And so we have beer, wine, tea, and coffee. And it's kind of a weird graph, and I kind of purposely made it a little bit cryptic, okay? And so on the right, it says 0. On the far left, it says 13,000, 8,000, 4,622 for coffee. So just a guess, a lot of experts here in the audience. Anybody have an idea what's being plotted here? What do you guys think? Don't be shy. Years, very good, absolutely. So we've got smart people in the audience. This is years ago, okay? 13,000 years ago. And so there's actually archaeological evidence that beer or fermented grain products were being produced, way back, 13,000 years ago. Wine is a bit more recent, 8,000. Tea, there's actually records of a Chinese emperor about 4,000 or almost 5,000 years ago preparing green tea. Coffee is an ultra-modern drink, right? So it goes back just about 600 years, okay? And so here's a very highly abridged timeline. So here I've converted this into actual modern years. And so here's 1400 AD. That's when coffee first started spreading in Yemen with the Sufis, the Islamic monks that used the coffee to stay awake. There's a few different things on here. I like putting Kaldi. So many of you have heard the legend of Kaldi, the goat that drank. There's no record of that until 1671 when a coffee importer made it. So it's actually, I think, a very nice example of early coffee marketing. Okay, so it's not an actual story. And then we're all here today because of Probat. So I put their founding date. I think I have their date there correct. So Probat was founded in the 1860s. And it's kind of amazing that Probat has been around for about 25% of the entire history of coffee, okay? And so And there's a couple other names on there. James mentioned when coffee first started, the first coffee fad started spreading in London in the 1650s. There's a couple names on here, Thomson and Lockhart are two, I think very important coffee scientists that are kind of obscure in the coffee industry. Okay. And so the main point here is that coffee is an ultra modern drink. All right? And if you really think about the entire history of humanity, it's only during the time period kind of concurrent with the development of modern science that coffee really spread. So you might think, well, because coffee was really developed during modern science, there should be a lot of coffee science. And so let's take a look at that. So here's the next infographic, which here it says the number of peer-reviewed scientific articles per year using a certain database, something called Web of Science, which scientists use, in the category specifically of food science and technology. And now we're zooming into the very recent past, so this is the past 20 years or so. And so let's first look at it, okay? And so here's coffee, right? And so you can see that it's started off low, somewhere around 50 articles per year in the year 2000, and it's actually kind of generally grown a little bit, right? And I should emphasize that this is all the papers, there's no quality filter, okay? A rule of thumb is that roughly half of scientific articles in any discipline are never cited by anybody. So they're just not found noteworthy enough to cite. But here's coffee, and let's see how it compares to the other ones. And so here's these other beverages, okay? And so wine is huge, okay? Almost 1,500 scientific articles published in 2021 on the topic of wine. Tea is almost as much, beer is closer to coffee. The key point here is that despite how important coffee is to the global economy, right? There's just not a lot of academic attention focused on coffee. Right? And that brings me to the third infographic, okay? Which is focusing on, why is that, right? And so here is the top 5 U.S. academic degree programs in certain disciplines. And my apologies to everybody not from the United States. There's lots of great science around the world, but here I'm most familiar with the United States, and so focusing on that. The top 5 U.S. academic degree programs, and what do I mean by degree program? I mean you can actually get a major in this. You can spend 4 years studying specifically, for example, viticulture and enology. And so here are the top 5 programs in the U.S. You've probably heard of many of these places. Cornell and UC Davis are in the top 2. Texas A&M, Cal Poly, which is in California, Michigan State. So 5 really excellent schools that have programs where you can focus on wine. I put petroleum engineering. I'm a chemical engineer. You can actually get a degree just in crude oil, okay, just in petroleum oil. And so Texas has 2 of the best programs. Texas, University of Texas, Austin, Texas A&M. Stanford, I think most people have heard of Stanford, has a degree. You can major in petroleum there. Colorado School of Mines and USC. And then for what we care about, what about coffee, right? And the punchline here is that there's none, okay? So there's nowhere in the United States where you can really focus for 4 years on coffee science, right? And if you think about the size economically of the wine industry, cumulative sales are here in the United States. And if you think about coffee, it's actually here, right? So there's a huge mismatch between the size of the economy, how important it is to our economy, to our culture, and the amount of academic investment in that, right? It's a huge mismatch. And there's a long talk one can make about the historical reasons for that. It all basically boils down to the fact that when the university programs were being developed in the 1800s, in the United States, there was no agriculture in the United States, and so the U.S. really never developed programs in coffee. So the main message here is that there's a lot of problems, a lot of challenges that the coffee industry faces. Here's a few snapshots, right? I think anybody in this room has probably heard lots of talks about all these different challenges. There's a picture of coffee rust. There's a picture of temperatures rising with climate change, labor shortages. On the far right there's another type of challenge, which is here's a kind of stereotypical, easy to make fun of, really complicated drink order. But the main point is that the consumer preferences are fickle and highly subject to change and can be highly specific, right? And so the coffee industry is fighting with both hands behind its back because you don't have the academic investment, you don't have all the research, intellectual firepower that one could have aimed at it. And so back to the question, how does coffee prepare for the 22nd century, okay? And so let's focus first on one aspect of that, which is how do we really start taking advantage of our awesome university systems to make a coffee science curriculum. And I think many people in the coffee industry don't even kind of realize that we're missing this. These other beverages, wine, crude oil. They can have entire academic programs focused on that. What about coffee? And so what you're seeing here is kind of a academic hierarchy, right? And this could be for any discipline, but they all have this general shape. At the bottom, you have kind of introductory magnet or survey courses, right? Where you just teach introductory concepts. And then you have more specialized graduate and upper division courses. And then there at the top, you have the graduate students, the ones getting master's degrees and PhDs, okay? And I have a few aspirational courses that I would love to see in a specialized graduate program focused specifically on coffee. But what I'll point out, and they mentioned this in the introduction, that here at UC Davis, we already have part of this. We have the green base of this hierarchy. We have the lower division course. And that's my course is called The Design of Coffee. We started it in 2013 as a freshman seminar, and it's really exploded since then. So here, these are the number of students that we have each quarter in that. And you can see there was a little dip during the pandemic, but it's bounced back up. I go back to California later this week, and I have 670 students signed up for a class about coffee at UC Davis this fall. And so that's the introductory stuff, but the lifeblood of any real academic program is the tip of that tower, and that's the PhDs and the graduate students. And so one really exciting thing that's happening at UC Davis over the past few years is that we've founded the Coffee Center, and we're really building up that graduate pipeline. And so here's kind of a slide summarizing where we're at. We have many different partners. You'll recognize many of these logos. Probat is a really strong supporter of the coffee program. And what we have is for the first time anywhere in the United States, we have a whole academic program and a whole building dedicated to advanced coffee science research and education. And the idea is to have everything you need for that advanced research and education under one roof. And so here's a floor plan of this. Next week, we're actually having our construction kickoff ceremony, with the golden shovels and lots of photos and things like that. But we're very excited about that. And the way the building is designed is, again, to have everything you need. There's a green bean storage laboratory with environmental chambers where you can modulate the temperature and humidity of the storage conditions. We have a Pete's Coffee pilot roastery. And I should emphasize that it's named in honor of their philanthropic contribution. So it's not just Pete's Coffee. We're using it for teaching and research. La Marzocco Brewing and Espresso Lab, a sensory lab, Folgers Chemical Analytical Lab, Toddy Innovation Laboratory. The roastery will feature lots of Probat roasters. Okay, and so that's the design for the building. Okay, and that's the infrastructure that we put together. But again, the most important thing is not just having a fancy building; it's the people that you have inside of it. And so here's some examples of recent coffee research at UC Davis. And I'm not going to talk about all of them. I'm not trying to give a technical talk here, but let me just give kind of a high-level view of some of the things we've been working on. And so I think many of you will recognize in the top left corner, we have the Coffee Tasters Flavor Wheel, the new one. And so many of you, I think, will remember the older one that was originally developed in the 1990s. And what I'd like to emphasize is that it was actually a graduate student at UC Davis, who actually served as a teaching assistant for my class. That's Molly Spencer, pictured there. And she actually took a lot of the data put together by WCR and their lexicon and did some advanced statistics to organize the Coffee Tasters Flavor Wheel. And she actually got that published on the cover of the journal Food Science, which, if you're a food science graduate student, that's like the holy grail. That's really awesome. And I have a question mark here on the right, because I want to emphasize that this is not a finished product, right? So going back to those fickle consumer tastes and changes, and as coffee continues to develop, the flavor wheel is not something that should be stagnant and static. As we just develop and discover new flavors, new defects, and other things, it's something that will change. Okay? And who's going to do that work? It's going to be researchers, who have expertise and training in coffee. Another example that I'm very fond of, because I've spent a lot of time over the past few years on it, is something called the Coffee Brewing Control Chart. So if you've taken any training about coffee brewing, you know that you can relate the total dissolved solids, how strong the coffee is, with the extraction yield, how much of the solid material did you rip out of the coffee grounds into the liquid phase. We've done a tremendous amount of research updating this. And so here's this guy's name, Lockhart again. This original chart was developed in 1957. Okay? We've done a whole bunch of research. There's a whole bunch of papers listed there. And right now in the process of going through peer review for a updated, modernized, streamlined version of the coffee brewing control chart. We actually have many different forms of it, some that have consumer preference data, some that have more directional multivariate statistics representations of where the different sensory profiles should be. This is kind of the streamlined, simple version. You can see, like, if you want to really highlight the sour and citrusy notes of a coffee, you should brew it to a certain strength and a certain extraction yield. Or if you want to make it sweet, that's down in the bottom left corner, things like that. And again, there's a question mark on the far right. And I just want to emphasize that, again, this is not something that's going to be written in stone. It's something that has to be dynamic, has to keep changing in response to new information that comes along. And the third example I'd like to talk about is something I'm really, really excited about because we're working on it right now with philanthropic support from Probat, which is how does roasting create desired sensory qualities? And I think there's a lot of people in the room here who care very deeply about roasting. And what our goal, our long-term goal, is to make not a coffee brewing control chart, but a coffee roasting control chart, which hasn't existed before. And in some sense, that's a very ambitious project. We want to take all the complexity of roasting and somehow boil it down to one two-dimensional representation. And that might not even be possible. But we're doing research on it to try to relate that. And so on the left here are some example roast profiles, right, where we're changing the energy input, changing that temperature versus time. And what we're then doing is taking samples every 60 seconds and immediately plunging them into liquid nitrogen to quench all the chemical reactions. And then we're doing a tremendous amount of physical and chemical characterization. Okay? And there's this one graph here on the right. The numbers are hard to read, but basically this is showing the concentration of certain types of chlorogenic acids, which I think many of you are familiar with. The concept of chlorogenic acids, those cause or contribute both to sourness and to bitterness in coffee, so they're really important. Okay? And you can see the different acids, their concentrations are changing with time during the roast in different ways. And as you change the roast profile, so if you go fast and then slow versus slow and then fast, you really change how those acids develop. Okay? So not a controversial statement. Anybody who's roasted knows that if you change how your roast profile, you can change how it tastes. Our goal is to make or to develop kind of deep mechanistic fundamental understanding of how that chemistry is altered as you change the roast profile and you get different sensory qualities of the final product. So those are three different examples of graduate PhD level research going on. And each one I've pictured or shown different photos of the actual students doing it. And that's one of my main messages about the long-term sustainability of coffee, right? And so when you read, press releases or read papers that have, summaries of graphs like this, it's really important for you guys in this, the people in the coffee industry who love coffee to realize that there's students behind the scenes, right? There's students who are getting trained, students who are learning about coffee, learning about chemistry, learning about all the things that go into coffee, and they're the ones who are going to be really tackling the questions that, let us develop the ability to think about how do we expand coffee to Mars, for example. And so that brings me back to the very first image, right? And the reason I think I really like this is not only that I like thinking about science fiction, I like thinking about the long-term sustainability of coffee throughout the whole solar system, but it's also kind of a metaphor, right? And so if you think about right now, I think coffee today, is, in terms of our scientific understanding, we're kind of in a dry desert, okay? And in that question mark right there, how do we get to a nice verdant, green, blue planet, or a better understanding of how to deliver precisely different flavor profiles, how to solve all these problems that I mentioned earlier, the coffee rust, problems of climate change and all that. How do we get there? What's in that question mark is the people, it's the grad students, right? So even if those of us in this room are not around in the 22nd century, what we need to do now is invest in that next generation of students and scientists who will be able to answer those questions. So with that, I'm out of time. Thanks very much for the invitation, and happy to chat.